Smith and counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are ready to begin again with this afternoon's testimony. Mr. McQueary, why don't you come on back up? While he's coming back up, let me tell you that we recognize the difficulty in hearing those audio transmissions, and that's due in large part to the way they were recorded. It's just hard to pick it up. And we also recognize that because of the new sound system, they're especially difficult to hear. And the attorneys are going to work together to get transcripts for you of what you heard and what you're about to hear. You're going to hear some more, I think, audio transmissions that are recordings of phone conversations. We're going to get transcripts for you so you can see it as best we can what was said. So we recognize it's difficult. Thanks for hanging in there and listening as best you can. We'll turn it up as loud as we can going forward. I think the quality of the audio is going to get a little better with these additional calls, but we'll make sure we get transcripts. So with that, Ms. Phillips, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. McQueary. I'm going to play for you now some of the recordings that you made with the Smiths over the telephone.
May I help you?
Is Tammi Smith there?
This is her.
Tammi, this is Logan McQueary.
Who?
Logan McQueary. You know, Elizabeth Johnson.
Hi.
Ex-boyfriend.
Yes, Logan. I've been on the computer for about an hour trying to find a number for you or your father. We've been freaking out. Please tell me you have the baby and he's safe.
No, we do not. I have orders from the judge that I have custody of Gabriel.
Do you know where he is?
No, Elizabeth, last time I talked to her was Friday, and she said there's no way in hell you'll ever talk to your son or see your son ever again. She hung up. And I went over there yesterday morning to pick him up, and she wasn't there. I went by last night about 10 o'clock at night, and she wasn't there. And
oh, my God, I'm freaking out. Okay, so let me tell you, we've been freaking out all weekend, too, because this is what she told us Friday. She's told us that, you know, you've been off and on over whether or not you want to put the baby up for adoption or not. And we've been, you know, of course wanting to adopt him, but at the same time trying to keep him safe no matter what. He just needs to be safe. I mean, we love him to death, but, you know, I mean, we have been worried sick. We've had him for almost 2 weeks. And then, you know, I was there at court. I saw you guys walk by, and I brought the baby up so you can see the baby and spend some time with him. And then she said, well, I guess he doesn't want to see his son, you know, and all this. And just nothing's adding up completely. And, I mean, I was going to call the police today and have them try to barge in and go inside the house and, you know, and see if she's in there. The car wasn't there, and we have weird fears of, you know, some kind of suicide. I don't know. I don't know what her true mental state is. You know?
You know, she's freaked out, and then, like, John, like, pretty much better and stuff, you know, okay. And then, but she keeps doing the same thing over and over again. She's not stable. That's why I was trying to, you know, explain to the judge that she, you know, when she gets really pissed off, she has taken the baby and, like, shook him, yelled at him, screamed at him to shut up and everything. And, you know, I tried to keep her from dealing with him. And that's why,
right.
You know, I'm a fear for Gabriel's life because she has done it before. And, you know, at the same time, I really do care about both of them, but I can't have Elizabeth hurting.
Right.
You know, and I don't know what kind of mental state she's in either. Just a little thing is better off in the past than, you know, it's better off again. So, and she can run right and, you know, take Gabriel with her, and I have no clue where they're at right now, so.
Yeah, I've been calling and calling. She said, okay, this is the deal. She called me Friday, and she said, this is the deal. Logan is calling and threatening me, and he said that if I don't have the baby to him at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, that the judge gave him, you know, the weekend from 8 a.m. Saturday to 8 a.m. Monday morning. And I said, are you sure? I said, because, you know, from everything I've heard from her, I'm afraid, like, she talks that you're going to leave the state with him or whatever. And, you know, and I'm like, you know, why don't you let us just talk to him, you know, and he can understand. I think she got upset because situation is with you, but I was telling her, she's like, well, I don't think he's going to sign the papers. And I said, we are totally willing to have a completely open adoption where Logan can come see him and his grandpa can come see him. And, I said, it takes a village to raise a baby. I said he would have a wonderful home with us. And she's like, I want him with you guys. He's got, my daughter is 4.5 and she's been crying since Friday. She cried the whole way home, cried all the way there to go pick him up because we're supposed to pick him up this morning. And, my brother, that's our baby brother because we truly believed that that's what was going on. And it was just a matter of, you understanding that this is hard to take care of him and all that stuff. And we were like, okay, I don't want to take a baby away from its father. And I said, well, why don't, we'll do an open adoption. Let us talk to Logan and his father, and maybe he'll understand things better, And I think she just didn't want you with the baby at all. I don't understand,
Yeah,
I mean,
wife with my dad won't let him see Gabriel at all or anything. She basically, she'd done this before. She took off and got on a plane. We got in an argument, and she just left, and I didn't know where she went. And I was looking for her, and she got on a plane, flew all the way to Boston, and called us when she was on the plane and said, well, I'm already gone, ha-ha.
Is that when I met her 7 months ago?
That was when Gabriel was, he was about a month or two old, something like that.
Yeah, that's when I met her and Gabriel, and at that time she wanted me to adopt him, and I cried for months because I was like, okay, I spent hours with this baby, and she gave me the baby in the airport, and then all the plane ride home and all this, and I really believed that that God wanted us to take that baby. And she never called me, and then finally she called me 2 weeks ago and said, are you ready to adopt him now? And I'm like, yeah, but are you ready? And I said, you need to sleep on this tonight and think about this, and if you're still feeling this way, we'll come up tomorrow and we'll sit and talk. And we did. We talked for about 3 or 4 hours and discussed everything. And she said, yes, I'm sure. So we took the baby, and about 3 or 4 days later, she said, I want to see him and make sure he's okay. So we went up there and we stayed for about an hour, and she held him, and she just looked the happiest I had ever seen her. Like she didn't look depressed or stressed out. She was hair done, makeup, clothes. She just looked beautiful, sounded good, and she said, I'm so happy. And she said, here, you need to go home, Gabriel. And she said, I believe that I made the best decision, and I now know that I'm doing the right thing for him. And we were like, wow, that's amazing. And so we went home, and and at that point, that's when we kind of were like, okay, this is for real. And so his name became Baby Brother because of my 4-year-old, and I mean, I'm just like in utter shock because normally I would talk to her a couple times a day. And I wish I would have just called you sooner, but I was afraid, that you were just going to be really mean to us, and I didn't understand the situation. And, I was kind of letting her work things out and stuff like that. And we figured you had the baby since we dropped the baby off.
The judge ordered me that I got custody of Gabriel from 8 a.m. Sunday morning to 8 a.m. I had to drop him off by 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning. And Elizabeth, when I talked to her on Friday, she said there's no way in hell you're ever seeing Gabriel ever again. And so I went down to court to try to get, she said there's no legal documentation. And I said, well, I'm going to go to court right now and get it. So I went to court. They said it wasn't prepared yet. I could pick it up by Monday. But if she doesn't let me pick him up on Sunday to come in and file a petition to enforce the judge's orders, and I filed that. And she had called in twice, talked to the judge Friday, asking if she really had to let me see him on Sunday. And so, that's on record too. And
I got the number for her, and she called, and she said, yes, if I don't let him see Gabriel, I could get myself in some big trouble, and he'll file things against me. And I said, well, you know what? God has everything under control. Gabriel's not going to be hurt. Nothing's going to happen to Gabriel. The worst that can happen is he can leave the state. And I said, but then things will be handled differently, you know. And I said, you just got to trust in God that everything's going to be okay. And I'm.
Ran or anything. She's always done that. She's always been the one that would just take off, pack her clothes, and leave. She did that when I was at work, and I come home, and it'd be empty, and I was like, where is she? And I called her brother and her grandpa, and they hadn't heard from her. And she eventually called me and talked to me and said I just couldn't handle things. I had to leave for a little while, and then she'd come back. And I told the judge too. She's taken off before, and I wouldn't put it past her that she'd take off again. That's why I didn't want. I wanted to make sure Gabriel. I was hoping that maybe he was with you guys, and she just left him there. Maybe she left herself. Maybe she just left Gabriel, and then hopefully, he had a better life, and she just thought that way, and she would just take off herself. But I guess she's taking the baby too. So. And the judge just gave me orders for temporary custody, and he said another hearing to the 28th. He wanted to talk to Elizabeth and ask her why she didn't follow his orders. So.
Yeah, I've left messages on her phone, and the last message I left was when we left there this morning around 10 a.m. And I said, Elizabeth, I'm going home. I'm going to get on the computer and look through public records to find Logan's family and your family, and I'm going to start making phone calls. Then I'm going to call the police. I said, I'm not calling the police on you. I'm just worried. I don't know if you have hurt yourself or if somebody has hurt you, or if you've been kidnapped. We don't know what's wrong with you. I don't understand why you haven't answered my phone calls, because that's not like her. She's been very extremely level-headed throughout this entire thing until now.
Yeah, she's always off and on. She's level-headed most of the time, and she'll pretend like everything's okay, but, I've seen it several times before with her. She always pretends that, and when she gets alone or she gets pushed into a corner or anything like that, she starts freaking out, and she'll take off and she'll run and she'll do whatever she wants. So she's not afraid of anybody or anything. Last time she got arrested, she destroyed my apartment. She got mad and caused $4,000 in damages to my apartment, busted out every window, dusted me everywhere, cut up my clothes with scissors, and broke everything. Took a knife to the couch, and she cut up some of the baby stuff with a knife. And thank God he was in daycare. But the cops came to arrest her, and she started kicking and hitting them, and they had to hog tie her, put her in the back of the van. And when they were putting her in the van, she was beating her head against the van floor, screaming at them. So I know that she's unstable, and
yeah, I think she knows that she's unstable, and that's why she wanted us to adopt the baby. I think she believes it in herself, but she just doesn't want to really come out and admit it,
Her brother and her grandpa and I would always talk to her about it, try to get her help, and she started going to the class, and I was happy that she was actually going to it every Sunday, because I was hoping she could realize some of the things that she was doing. But then when I actually did talk to her, it's like everything that she was doing, she was blaming on me, and she was the actual person doing it, freaking out all the time, screaming and yelling. I was like, Elizabeth, you're blaming me for the things that you've done. And, she got pissed off for me saying that, but I was like, I haven't done any of these things that you said. I don't scream you. I never get mad at anything. Throughout our whole relationship, that she's gotten mad and pissed off at me, throwing things and broken out windows. I've never really gotten pissed off at all. I just try to fix everything, and we keep getting back together. I try to fix everything, but it keeps happening over and over again, and that's why this final time I was just like, I can't keep doing this. It's been going on for 3 years.
Right. So do you think she could have gotten on a plane?
I don't know. I guess we're going to start looking probably for the vehicle that she's driving. Her grandpa's. It's registered to him.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if you have the grandfather's number, it's his car.
Yeah.
So he would be able to look for the car. Your dad's a cop, right?
Yeah, he's a retired police officer.
So he could look for the car himself, probably,
See what we can do.
She did have a friend. There was a guy there when I dropped her off one day, and she had forgotten that I don't know who the guy was. She said it was a friend. I don't know if he's actually, I don't know who he is, but, she could have gone somewhere else to stay for a while to just get away from everything. Because I know she was telling me, I just wanted this to be easy. I just wanted you to be able to adopt the baby and let this be easy. I just want to be done with Logan and all the drama. I just want to change my life, become a new person. You know what I mean? She's just wanting to recreate herself as a young adult and get rid of it all. And not only has she not gotten rid of it all, but now it's getting worse because now she's got to do court and she's got to do all this other stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to not have to go through all this, and I told her that I didn't want to have to go through all this, but if she wasn't willing to cooperate with me and talk to me, that, this is the only way I know how to do it. And
well, Logan, let me ask you this. I mean, is it true? I mean, are you off and on the fence of whether or not Gabriel should be adopted out to a good family, or is she just telling me this?
we talked about it a while ago when, because I did 4 months in Tempe City, and I got out of work for a little, and I was working, I got out 12 hours a day to work and go see Elizabeth and Gabriel, and then I'd go back for 12 hours. And we had talked about it a little bit then because, it was a little bit hard on her, and she was by herself because I was incarcerated for a month after Gabriel was born. She was taking care of him for the first month. And she said, can we really take care of this baby? And I said, further down the road, I get out, because that was, I think, maybe 10 days before I got out. And we talked about it, and I told her, further down the road, if we really can't take care of him, we decide that, then we'll both decide if we want to put him up for adoption or not. But then I never heard anything about it after that.
Right.
So, and until she called my work and did that whole fiasco and said, I already gave him up for adoption, you need to sign the paperwork now. And I told her, no, I don't know.
Yeah, that's not the way it works.
And I don't know the people, I haven't met them, and I'm not signing anything. I said, where's Gabriel? And she said, well, he's with them already, so you need to sign the effing paperwork. And I'm like, no, Elizabeth, I'm not signing any paperwork. She said, well, I'm coming down to your work then. So I don't know if they you guys probably had them then when the police were looking.
We did. Oh, yeah, we did.
Police that I had come back and I had kidnapped Gabriel and I had him. So they held me for like 7 hours questioning me, and I was like, I don't have him. I don't know where he's at. I would like you guys to find him. And I was there from 5 o'clock all the way till like 10, 11 o'clock at night. So, and the cops were questioning me because Elizabeth kept saying, I have him, or one of my family members has him, and that's what she kept telling me. And I was like, they finally believed me that I didn't have him.
Yeah, they called me about 10 o'clock at night, and we have a house on acreage out about, it's probably, by the time you get off the interstate, about 25 minutes of almost pitch dark because, we're out in acreage in North Scottsdale, like out in the true north area, where it's not like a bunch of street lights all over the place. And, I mean, they called me at 10, they called me again and again, and then finally about midnight, they said, okay, we're heading out there, give me the address. I'm like, well, you're never going to find it, let me help you to get out here. So I didn't even sleep that night, but 2 hours, dealing with all of that, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what are we getting ourselves into? And I just sat and prayed, and I just felt like, we adopted her 4.5-year-old, and she knows exactly who her birth mom is. The birth dad didn't want anything to do with her, and he left the whole scene. But, we've got an open adoption with her. She sees her birth mom whenever her birth mom is straight because she's, off and on drugs. So when she's straight, she calls us and says, hey, can I see Hannah? And we're like, yeah, we're having a Christmas party. Come over, And no big deal, but it's like we were thinking, oh my gosh, what are we getting ourselves into with Gabriel? And after having him for almost 2 weeks, we realized, you know what? We love this baby. We will do anything in the world for him. We will fight for him, whatever it takes. But at the same time, I'm not going to fight to take him away from a family that love him and take care of him and love him to death. And it's different if you love him so much you want better for him, you know what I mean, than to be a single dad. Because I don't think Elizabeth's truly going to be a mom to him once all is said and done, I really think that by the time you go to court and everything, I don't know what she's going to do. I don't know.
We both agreed on to have shared custody, and I thought things, were maybe going to, be okay, and we could work it out a little bit. And she said to the judge, I'm willing to do shared custody. Logan can see him. And then all of a sudden, she just flipped out again.
And all the while we had him. She was doing that because she was hoping that if she had more custody, she thought that she could sign over adoption rights without you. And I'm like, no, that's not the way it works. I said, you can't just sign over adoption because you have more custody. And she's like, well, then can I give you custody? She's like, I want to give you guys custody and him have supervised visitation. And he can come, and he can be supervised or whatever. And all I know is she doesn't want Gabriel. She does not. When I see her with Gabriel, she acts like he's a child that she sees at Walmart, and she's just pushing her grocery cart or whatever, and she sees another kid, and she's like, oh, what a cutie. That's it. She's got no. Me and my husband, when we see Gabriel, about 50 million times a day, whatever, it's like it doesn't matter every single time. We're just like so in love, and the loving embraces that we give to him, and his mom doesn't do that. And
my whole family noticed whenever we'd go over to, we'd bring him over to see my grandma or my dad or something, and everybody noticed that about Elizabeth, but everybody was like, well, maybe she's just, postpartum, depression right now or something, and doesn't really know how to take care of him, or maybe she's sad or something. So we were trying to hopefully, maybe she'd get better, but she's been like this even before she had Gabriel. Like, she had this problem with she never wanted a baby before, even when she got pregnant. She said, I don't want it. And I said, well, here's the money for an abortion if you really want to get it. And she took the money, and I didn't see her, for a few weeks, and then she came back and said, well, I'm keeping the baby. All she wanted was the money. So she never really wanted a baby at all. She said that, made that perfectly clear to her grandpa and her brother. Everybody enjoys seeing him. My whole family loves him. They want to see him and be together. And she kind of got jealous over that too. And she's never really had a big family or anything like that. And I come to understand that because she grew up with her brother and stuff. So all she has is her brother and her grandpa right now. So both of her parents are gone. And her mom died when she was really young, and her dad died a few years ago.
Yeah, well, you have to bond in the first year of life, or there's a possibility you may not ever bond. And, and I told her that, we bonded with him, and I don't think he actually even bonded with her. Whenever we had brought him around her for a visit or whatever, she would take him and he would cry and lean towards either me or my husband. It's almost like he was like, wait, I don't want you, I want them. And
she got really mad at me because he did that too with me, because she would, whenever I would be at work, she'd put him in his room and leave him in his room until he needs bed or something like that, and then she'd feed him and put him back in his room, and that's about it. If he changed his diaper, that's it. She lets him in his room. I'd go to work and he'd be in his room. I'd come home, she'd be in his room, and I was the only one to take him out and play. I'd be in his room, because she would get mad if I would take him to the living room, and she'd say, get that fucking thing out of here. And I'd put him in his room, and I'd go in his room and I'd play with him with the door shut so that she didn't have to listen to him, and she'd just get pissed off if she heard him crying. And
we had a feeling that that's what was happening, because, when we got Hannah, she was 5 months old, and she had never been bonded with her birth mom, and she was basically locked in her little car seat, the baby car seat, locked in there constantly all day. And the birth mom has more of a drinking problem than anything else, and she would, she'd be drinking all night long with the baby locked in there, and then she'd pass out, and she might start drinking at 3 in the afternoon and not realize she'd wake up at 5 in the morning, and the baby had the whole car seat would be soaking wet because nothing to eat, but yet she's still peeing, but yeah, we kind of had that feeling when we first got Gabriel, because just the way he acted, he hadn't had stimulation, we started to play with him, and he was just like, he didn't understand what playing and talking to him meant, really, but So I'm very worried now that you've had all this stimulation, and now, hold on. Hey, give me your hair, come here. Let's put your hair in a ponytail. Oh, don't pull. Sorry, her hair's caught in one of these cactus bushes. Ouch. I'm really worried because if she has him, and he was used to us giving him all this love and attention and playing with him, now he's with her and he's not getting that. The most watch out, there's another sticker bush. Why are you even out?
So, if he starts crying or something like that, you get really annoyed with him, and know what she can do.
Yeah, because we were driving one day to the court to go fill out those papers, and he was crying in the back of the car, and I could tell she was getting very nervous. And I'm like, he's a baby. He's in the car. He's gonna cry.
All of us.
Like, where's the thinky? Wanting to shut him up, and I'm like, well, he doesn't want a thinky. What's wrong with him? I'm like, nothing's wrong with him. He's a baby. That's what they do. He's crying.
She wouldn't have to be around it. If he started crying, she'd put him in a room or something. I'd have to go in there and, calm him down or something. She, literally scream at him to shut up. And I got on her case several times for it. I was like, you can't do that. He's a baby. He's going to cry. You have to just let him cry. You can cuddle him and stuff, but if he's going to cry, he's going to cry. And especially like now that he was starting to tease and stuff, and she couldn't be around it at all. She'd leave and she'd, come back in a few hours or something.
Oh, God, I hope she calls you or me or something.
I doubt she'll call me. She'll call you before she does me. She doesn't want me to have anything to do with them. But I got to get going because I got to, start. I don't know where I'm going to start looking for him, but I'm going to start looking around.
Well, put an ATV out on the car for sure. What can we do? I mean, I don't know.
Basically, all we can do is sit and wait right now and see if she shows up. She's got to pop her head up somewhere. So, she's staying in a hotel or somewhere else. I don't know how much money she has or nothing. She always hid that from me. She always kept a separate bank account and never told me how much money she had. And I know
she sold her 2 dogs.
Sold off the dogs and stuff. And I don't know what else stuff she sold off the house.
Yeah, she gave everything away, every single thing that Gabriel had, and we, because we went and bought a brand new, we bought everything. We've got a house full of baby food, formula, diapers, you name it. We went and bought everything, crib, a new dress, everything for him, and here we are, just was really upset about it.
Yeah, I'm really good at it. I haven't seen him in a while.
Well, I know you said that they gave you temporary custody, but please keep in touch with us, and we are great people. We're great people. We're a loving family, me, my husband, and Hannah. And all we want is just another child for our daughters, so she can have a sibling, so we can have, our 2 kids, the perfect family, But, I know that you love him too, and we're totally open to an open adoption where you and your family can see him always, We're not the type of people that say, nope, he's ours, we want this perfect family. No, Hannah even sees her birth mom. She knows whose belly she came out of. She knows everything, and she's happy knowing all of that, and because I know as a single dad, it's going to be really hard for you, and we've got this 4,000 square foot home with just me, Hannah, and my husband, and acreage all around to ride 4-wheelers and horses and, and a great community over here. And anyway, we really, really love him. So just please be in touch with me, and probably I will continue to, we live pretty far from her, but at least every other day, maybe I'll just go over there and, maybe write notes on her door and maybe leave her some flowers or something, to let her know that we're not angry at her. Wait, you want me to log this number in my phone? Is this your number? Okay, I'll log this number in. Okay, yeah, I stopped by your work today and asked them to give you a call, and I told them I needed to talk to you. It was really important, and they didn't have a phone number for you. They just had Elizabeth's phone number. Okay, well, I'm going to log this in as your phone number, and if I hear from her, I will call you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Logan. Bye.
Okay, and for the record, that was Exhibit 184. Was that the first time you talked to Tammy?
Yes.
That would have been on December 20th, 2009?
Yes.
This is Exhibit 185.
It's 210-870-3843. Thanks now. I'm sorry, say again? Well, here's what I understood, and if you want, I can give it phone back to Tammy. But what Tammy told me is what she's wanting you to do is, she says that she is frightened of you and her father. Now, what that means, I don't know. Okay, so I'm not even going to read anything into that. Give me a second, and then you can do it if you want to. I'm not going to read anything into that. But what she said is, if you will sign the papers, the adoption papers, then there's a 5-day waiting period. We know this. We've been doing this with our attorney. Okay, so if you sign the papers, then there's a 5-day waiting period for you to change your mind. Okay, she said after you sign them, 5 days later, she will bring Gabriel to us and sign the papers. Well, you know what? I didn't get to talk to her, and we're hoping. Again, we can't force her hand because, first of all, I'm not an attorney, and she said to Tammy, well, I don't have to be there because I've not been served. Well, in some situations that is true. In other words, on a very small scale, taking it down to as simple as if you get the photo radar, until they serve you, you can't be charged. But if they serve you, you have to be in. So a simple. I'm sorry, say it again. Yes. But now, again, we're suggesting, and what we'll do, if you'll allow us to take the lead here to a certain degree, we'll tell her to call our attorney. We'll pay for it. We'll ask her to call our attorney and say, okay, if I'm not served, what's going to happen, or what could happen? So that from a legal, because I can sit here and talk about this from now when Jesus comes, but I'm not an attorney. My position would be, if I were in your shoes, my position would appear, if she's gone, then beyond any shadow of a doubt, they can call emergency and then do whatever they need to do. They can call Amber Alert. They can call anything. I mean that's from my perspective. But again, I'm not an attorney. Okay, so I don't know. But if we can keep this line of communication, maybe we can get her to talk to our attorney. If our attorney says to her, you know what, sister, you ain't got a choice because the minute if you're not there, then you're going to be then the chances are he is awarded. I'm just saying that chances are he's awarded. San Antonio, Texas is where 210 is. Can you look it up? they said, you know what, you got to get here. I mean, you got to be represented there. Now, back to what you said a second ago. What you saying is, and you know what? Again, if I were you and I loved my son, I would want to know, even if you are thinking about it, I would want to know who the people are and look in their eye and see who it is that we're talking about doing this. But I also can promise you this, that if you do decide the best thing to do, if you want to come out here and spend every weekend with him, you can. Again, he would never, just like right now, if you were to walk up to Hannah and say, whose tummy did you come out of? She'd tell you. It ain't ours. She knows, because again, and that's the only thing that I have to be able to give you as proof as to the fact that it's not our idea, it's not our concept to be the vile mother and father and never, because again, our idea is to give a wonderful life to a wonderful child that could otherwise, and again, I don't know what your situation is. I know what her situation is. If I were you, I certainly wouldn't want my son, again, I hope this is not racial profiling here, but I wouldn't want my son growing up in a trailer park. You know what I'm saying? Are you there? Okay. And again, I don't mean that to be disrespectful to that, because I'm sure there's a lot of loving people that just don't have any alternative. Right. And so, but my point is not trying to make there is, if you two are there, then it's okay. But I'm talking about, what you would want for your son if she had custody of him. Yeah, please don't get me wrong in that. I wasn't putting anybody down, or trying to build up, what I'm saying. But if there's an alternative, if there is an alternative and a good alternative, maybe I dug myself into a hole, and I don't mean to do that. I didn't mean to do that, because I'm not putting anybody down who lives in a trailer. I'm just saying that not knowing if she's got a job, not knowing if this, that, and the other. So anyway, I probably should stop, because I don't want to come off as though I'm putting anybody down, because I'm not. But once again, and it's just very important that the line of communication be kept open here, and I think you know that. So, did you have something else? If you want to get together, you want to try to do this, and do it quick. I'm not talking about signing papers. I'm talking about getting together and discussing the possibilities of that. I wouldn't suggest that you meet for a second and sign papers. That has to be yours. But once again, not to be redundant, I'm just trying to say to you that the only line we've got is this right now, and please don't mess it up.
And Mr. McQueary, again, for the record, that was Exhibit 185. Do you know the approximate date of that conversation?
It was either the day after or, either the 21st or 22nd.
And to your knowledge, you were talking to Jack Smith?
Yes.
And that recording starts out, you had mentioned one of the recordings started kind of in the middle of the conversation.
I believe that was the one.
Okay.
I think there was maybe like 2 minutes before that.
Okay, but the recording starts out with Jack giving you Elizabeth's San Antonio phone number, right?
Yes.
And there is just one more, it's Exhibit 186.
Not even going to think about the adoption at all?
Well, I have been thinking about it, but, I want to give it the life and all that. I want to try first.
Yeah. Well, this is what she said, basically. I think she talked to me for a second, and then I let her talk to Jack, and she asked if we gave you her number, and Jack said, I told him, truth, I'm telling you the truth, I gave him the number, but he's not going to harass you and all this kind of stuff. And then she flipped out and started crying and basically had a plan already, said that if you're going to back her into a corner, she's going to continue. And so basically she is going to work, not use her Social Security number, she's just going to work for cash jobs, like just working at little places, being a waitress or whatever, work for cash, and homeschool him and just be on the run. And I said, you want to be on the run forever and one day you get caught? And, she's like, if I ditch everything that I have, nobody knows who I am anyway, and nobody knows who Gabriel is. And I'm like, that's really what you wanted. So now she's leaving, going to another state, and she said, I will just be on the run forever. So that's her plan. I don't understand any of this, I don't understand any of it. I said, well, if you look Gabriel, how can you be on the run? That's not good for him. You think, and she's like, well, because of him and his dad, and they just want to win. And I'm like, that's not loving Gabriel, though. I mean, if you think you're bad people, you're going to keep your son on the run. And that's not a good life for him, for the life that you think that they're getting, that he would get over there. And I even told her, I said, you can come live with us. We've got 6 bedrooms. You can have your own bedroom. You can come live here and go to school. And, and she's like, I don't trust you guys anymore. And, and you gave me my number and I don't trust you. And I'm like, well, keep in touch with me and you can call me and just, put star 67 and that way you can block the number and I won't know. I won't know where you are. And she's like, I thought I could trust you, and I don't even trust my family members. That's why I didn't block my number, because I thought I could trust you. And now she's gone. So hopefully she will call me again and just block the number, and at least we'll know he's...
Again, for the record, that was Exhibit 186. Do you recall what date that was?
Before Christmas sometime, maybe the 23rd.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect. Ms. Andrews.
Logan, you heard the hearing from December 17th, 2009, as it was played in court earlier today. Had you ever listened to that recording ever before?
No.
other than being at that hearing on December 17th, 2009, did you have review transcripts or anybody tell you what happened in that hearing?
No.
So when you testified before hearing that recording, did you have to rely on your memory from what happened that day?
Yes.
When you came in here yesterday prepared to testify in this trial, did you sit down and go through and figure out all the dates and times everything happened?
No.
Are you expecting us to be able to provide those dates and time?
Yes, hopefully.
And in fact, didn't you ask me, don't you have my phone records?
Yes.
And prior to hearing these recordings today, other than when you listened to them enough to identify them, to admit them, have you listened to these recordings in their entirety?
Some of them, yes.
When was the last time you listened to them in their entirety?
At least a year ago. Over a year ago.
When I questioned you first yesterday, we talked about that first phone call from Tammi Smith.
Yes.
And I asked you how you felt about her, and you said you thought she was a nice lady. You recall that? And after listening to the phone call again today, that very first phone call with Tammi, do you still feel that that's how you felt at that time?
The first phone call, yes.
And how did you feel after the first phone call you had with Jack Smith?
After the first phone call?
After the first phone call with Jack.
Just kind of felt pressured because they just kept bringing up adoption over and over again.
How did you feel about the remarks he made about the trailer?
I was pissed off.
Did you tell Jack you were pissed off?
I think he pretty much got the point. I said it didn't matter where you lived. It matters the parents who raised the kid, how they grow up.
I think there's some confusion a little bit into dates. Yesterday, when defense counsel was cross-examining you, she was asking you about the first time you recorded Tammi Smith, and you were talking about the first time you were recording. In my opinion, I think those got confused, so let me clarify that. When was the first time you ever used a recorder for this situation?
The day that I went to pick up Gabriel, when I was supposed to pick him up Sunday morning.
And what did you record that very first time?
I believe it was, I just recorded the time and date and me walking up to the trailer, knocking on the door of the trailer to go pick up Gabriel.
And was that December 20th, 2009?
Yes.
Your phone call with Tammi Smith, was it at that same time?
I believe it was later that day.
And the phone call with Jack Smith, about approximately when was that?
Either later that day or the next day, somewhere around that time.
And do you believe your phone records will show
Yes.
when those calls were?
Yes.
And if I told you told the detective you thought it was December 22nd or 23rd, those first phone calls were with Tammi and Jack, would you disagree with that?
It probably was. I don't believe, if I'm trying to think of it, it was around that time period. I can't narrow down the exact day. It was between the 20th and Christmas.
You had testified a couple of times that you felt pressured by the Smiths in regard to signing adoption papers. And defense counsel asked you, well, did they ever present adoption papers to you? And you responded, no.
Yes.
Did the Smiths attempt to meet with you?
They had asked me to meet with them, yes.
And did you agree to meet with them?
No.
And let's be clear a little bit here. I showed you a recorder, and you identified that as the recorder that you gave to Officer Snell on December 27, 2009.
Yes.
But we also talked about some recordings that you made after December 27, 2009.
Yes.
How did you record after December 27, 2009 if you gave that recorder to Officer Snell?
I got another recorder.
And in fact, we talked about a conversation you had with Tammi Smith and Jack Smith on December 28, 2009. Do you recall that from yesterday?
Yes.
And on that date, did you call the Detective Ramirez and advise her of those conversations?
Yes.
And at a later time, did you meet with Detective Ramirez and provide her with the recording recording of the conversation?
With one of them. One of them I did not have my recorder at the time.
Okay. And that's one thing I wanted to cover too. On cross-examination yesterday, Ms. Phillips was asking you about recording the phone calls, and you said there was one you didn't record. Can you please explain to us about that phone call that you didn't record?
After the custody hearing on the 28th, I had a conversation with Tammi Smith, and that had been recorded. And then I left it just sitting on the sitting on the seat in my car, and went into Denny's and was eating with my father. And that's when Jack Smith called me back, really angered and pissed off, and I didn't have my recorder when that conversation took place.
And what was Jack pissed off about?
About me calling Tammi Smith and asking her not to talk to me or call me anymore, because I had felt that she had more of a bigger part in this than she was letting me to believe, and I pretty much just asked her not to contact me or call me anymore, and I hung up the phone. Then when I went into Denny's, Jack Smith called me and said, "Why don't you talk to me like you talk to my wife and be a man," and just a bunch of stuff. And I pretty much told him the same thing: don't call me, don't talk to me. And I'm telling you the same thing I'm telling Tammi Smith. And then I hung up. And then that's when I called Detective Ramirez and told her about the phone conversations.
And so the first phone calls with the Smiths, we'll clear up the dates a little later, but the first phone call with the Smiths were sometime on or after December 20th, 2009.
Yes.
And this phone call that you just talked about, where you told Tammi Smith not to call you anymore, was December 28th, 2009.
Yes.
And you've indicated that you told her not to call because you felt they had more to do with this?
Yes.
What was it that happened between those first phone calls and the phone calls on December 28th, 2009 that changed your opinion about Tammi Smith being a nice lady?
Just how they kept bringing up adoption over and over again, and looking up information about them, and just some things were fishy that I didn't agree with, and I didn't know all the information about them, but I didn't know them at the same time. So and there was text messages too, their conversation.
And those are the text messages we talked about yesterday morning?
Yes.
The ones you gave to Officer Snell and he wrote down on those cards?
Yes.
Now, the recording wasn't very clear. It was difficult to hear your part of the conversation. But in one of the recordings, Tammi Smith asked you if you're not thinking about adoption at all. And your response was a little difficult to hear. You tell us what you told Tammi at that time?
I believe I said I had thought about it, but I want to try to raise Gabriel by myself and on my own.
In the court hearing on December 17th, 2009, the recording that we just heard, there was conversation about you reporting to CPS. And in fact, Elizabeth Johnson told the judge that you had reported her to CPS, and the judge made a remark that the timing was suspect. You made a comment after that to the judge, telling him about the contact with CPS. Were you trying to explain to the judge what was happening and why you contacted CPS when you did?
Yes, I was trying to explain to him the reasons I put on the report when I filled out the custody paperwork, or to file for custody, you have to fill out the paperwork and everything and explain. It has questions on there, what everything they've done and stuff like that. And I was just trying to explain, what was happening, and that Gabriel wasn't in her custody, and because Gabriel was with the Smiths for 2 weeks and she didn't have him at all.
And do you think you had the opportunity to explain to Judge McVeigh that Gabriel wasn't even in Elizabeth's custody at the time?
I didn't have the opportunity at all. He wouldn't let me explain it.
In fact, in that hearing on December 17, 2009, did you hear Elizabeth tell the judge that Gabriel was with a babysitter?
Yes.
Recording that defense counsel played from Elizabeth to you, or from you to Elizabeth, I can't recall. She makes a statement that says, "On Christmas Day, you're harassing my roommate." What's she talking about there?
I went over to the trailer where we used to live together, and knocked on the door my surprise, that's when the roommate that she had moved into Gabriel's room, because she sold all Gabriel's stuff. He moved in there, and I had asked him if he knew where Elizabeth was and everything, and he said no, he didn't know where she was.
Sustained. Don't talk about what somebody else said. You can just explain without stating what they said.
If you could just go on and tell us what you were doing there.
Looking for Elizabeth and Gabriel.
And had you ever met Elizabeth's roommate before that?
No.
Did you know she had a roommate?
I had heard, but I didn't know for sure.
And that was on Christmas Day?
Yes.
And you moved out December 8th, 2009?
Yes.
Elizabeth also tells you in that phone call that you had her phone number, but you didn't call. Is that true? Had you never called her at that point?
I believe I called her a few times. She just never answered.
So if you called her a few times and she never answered, did you ever tell her she was facing kidnapping charges?
I never, no.
Did you ever tell her she was going to prison?
No.
Now, defense counsel was asking you for the date of the phone call, that first phone call from Elizabeth where she talked about you harassing her roommate on Christmas Day.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, that was after Christmas.
Yeah.
Correct?
Thinking about it, it was the 26th.
Okay, and then she made another call to you, which was December 27, 2009.
Yes.
Back to the first call with Tammi Smith, where you originally thought she was a nice lady. She talks to you in great detail about open adoption with her daughter, Hannah. Did she ever tell you that Hannah is actually Jack's granddaughter?
No.
Did she tell you that the open adoption she had with Hannah's mother is actually Jack's daughter?
No.
Did you ever learn that anytime during this case?
Afterwards, yes.
During the phone calls Tammi had with you, she made several comments about how she felt about Gabriel. In the first phone call, she said she spent hours with that baby. Well, specifically, she said, I spent hours with that baby, and I really believe that that's what God wanted, for us to take that baby. Do you recall that comment?
Yes.
And that was in the first phone call. Did you think anything of that statement?
Not at the time, no.
Later on, in another conversation, she said to you, after having him for 2 weeks, we realized, we love this baby. Did you think anything about that comment at the time?
Not at the time.
And then the last conversation she had with you, she said, we really, really love him. Did you think anything of that comment at that time?
No.
What do you think of those comments now?
Now they make a little bit more sense.
Obviously, Gabriel was just shy of 8 months old the last time you saw him.
Yes.
Is that right? And you talked about the pregnancy, the morning sickness, the first time you remember Elizabeth having morning sickness.
Yes.
So you had significant contact with your child?
Yes.
How did you feel about him?
Gabriel, I loved him. He was my son. We did pretty much everything together. Everything that I did, he was pretty much there with me when I was home.
And how did you feel about Tammi Smith trying to get you to give him up for adoption?
Didn't like it at all. Felt pressured. At that time, I didn't really know what to think or do. I tried to get help, and nobody would help me.
Thank you, Logan.
Thank you. Before Mr. McQueary steps down, now's the opportunity. If the jury has any questions, you can write them down, or if you've already written them down, the attorneys and I can talk about them if there's any questions. Does the jury have any questions for Mr. McQueary before he steps down? Going once, going twice. May this witness be excused, Ms. Andrews?
Yes, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused, Ms. Phillips?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may be excused. You may step down. Thank you. All right, Mr. Romano, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Would you state your full name, please?
James E. Morris,
And Mr. Morris, how are you employed?
I'm a supervisor for the clerk of the court,
Okay, and which court is that?
Superior Court of Maricopa County,
Okay, and how long have you had that position?
about 14 years.
And were you employed, obviously, well, you were employed in that particular position in January of 2010?
Yes.
All right. And as part of that position, what are your job duties?
At that time, I was the file room supervisor. I saw that the judges got the files they needed. I occasionally made copies to help the front counter when people were requesting copies. I looked for files that couldn't be located.
And you indicate that you would help the front counter when people needed copies. Does the clerk's office provide copies of documents to individuals that are requesting them?
Yes.
And those are certified copies of court documents that they
If they're
provide?
requested to be certified.
Okay.
They're not. There's a charge for the certification, and not everybody requests certified documents.
All right. So as part of your job duties back in January 2010, you had access to all court files.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you remember being involved in making a copy of a file at one point of obtaining original documents in a custody case?
Not specifically, no. I don't recall it.
Okay. Is that something that you would do as part of your job duty?
Yes, it would.
All right. May I approach the exhibit table, Your Honor?
You may.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's marked as State's Exhibit 63. And there's an envelope inside of the outer envelope. Would you please pull that out?
Okay.
Do you recognize that envelope?
I recognize my signature and the date and my handwriting saying that it's original documents for a family court case.
Okay, and does that mean then you prepared whatever is within that envelope?
Yes.
Okay, and when you state that those are original documents, I just want to be clear, those are the original documents that were filed with the court on that custody case?
Yes, ma'am. I see that there, through the holes in the envelope, I can see that there's the barcode that goes over the original documents when they're scanned and put in the boxes.
Okay, and when you put those documents into that envelope, did you put all the documents that were requested within that envelope?
To the best of my knowledge.
All right. And you indicated that you wrote in your own handwriting on there that it states original documents,
Yes.
correct? And your initials that are on there, are they actually on a piece of tape?
Yes, they are.
And what does that signify?
Apparently somebody requested that the envelope be sealed and that I date and sign it. For whatever reason, I couldn't tell you at this time. But
Okay. And so that indicates to you that after you placed those documents in there, you taped it and signed it with the date?
yes.
And is the date on there January 13th of 2010?
Yes, it is.
May I have a moment?
You may.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination, Ms. Phillips?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from the jury for Mr. Morris before we let him step down? Going once, going twice. May this witness be excused, Ms. Ramuno?
Yes, please, Your Honor.
May be excused, Ms. Phillips?
Yes, Your
You may
Honor.
step down. Thank you. Watch your step going down.
Your Honor, we may have time for one more witness, another short witness. The state calls Mary Young. May I get her in the hallway?
You may.
Ms. Young, would you please state your full name for the record?
Mary Young.
And Ms. Young, how are you employed?
I work for the clerk of the Superior Court
Okay, and what court is that?
of
Which
Maricopa
court?
County.
Maricopa County. And how long have you had that position?
It'll be 9 years in May.
All right, so is it safe to assume you had that same position in January of 2010?
In a different department,
In a different department. What department were you in 2010?
Discovering Confidential.
And at that time, do you recall on a date in January of 2010 meeting with a detective and providing documents?
Yes.
All right. Was that Detective Duplissis from the Tempe Police Department?
I recalled Tempe Police Department. I don't recall his name.
All right, that's fair. Is it safe to say that you deal with a lot of people on a daily basis?
Yes.
All right. What do you recall about that meeting?
I recall my administrator asking me to go to our micrographics department where they wear gloves so they don't damage the film. And she asked me if I would bring up a pair of white gloves. And that's
did you
what
do
I'll
so?
remember. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I got the gloves and I met her up in the conference room.
All right, and the detective was present?
Yes.
All right, and if the detective indicates that you observed him looking at court documents, would you have any reason to dispute that?
No, not at all.
If the detective indicates that you made a receipt of the documents that were provided to him, would you have any reason to dispute that?
No.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination, Ms. Phillips?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, does the jury have any questions for Ms. Young before we let her go? Going once, going twice. May this witness be excused?
Yes, please, Your Honor.
May she be excused? You may sit down. Thank you. Watch your step going down. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're about at our early breaking point today. We're going to break early for the day, as I told you earlier. So we're going to be finished for the day. Once again, remember the admonition: do not watch the news, do not follow any trials, do not get on the internet and look at news sites. You need to avoid any kind of exposure to media or anything about this case. If you have any issues, let me know tomorrow. Have a good evening. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to start at 10:30. We're going to start closer to 10:30 than we did today. But make sure you're back by 10:25. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good evening. Remember the admonition.
All rise for the jury.
Please be seated, everyone. Okay, we're outside the presence of the jury. What exhibit number was Mr. Morris looking at? I'm not sure I wrote that down.
63, Your Honor.
63.
May I place it back on the evidence table?
You may. Okay. Didn't know. Yeah. Okay. All right. What I plan on doing is taking a break for a few minutes for our court reporter and then coming back. Dr. O'Connell, I believe, is here. Is that correct, Ms. Phillips?
I don't know, Your Honor. I assume so.
Okay. We're hoping she's out in the hallway. Assuming she is, we'll pick up again in about 10 to 15 minutes. She's going to take the stand. Ms. Phillips is going to ask questions. We'll have cross-examination if desired, and then any redirect, and then we'll talk about whether her proposed testimony is admissible or not. Anything else we need to talk about before we move into that phase?
One quick thing, and before we get to that, this is the chance for me to interview Dr. O'Connell for the first time, so if we need a little more than 10 minutes, I'll let the court staff know, but it should be fairly quick. But it just occurred to me that Judge McVeigh sealed some of the family court documents in the family court case, and we're a little unclear as to why he did that, perhaps because of the nature of the investigation at the time. I asked the court to unseal any of the family court documents for purposes of this criminal case.
Okay, so I'm taking that as an oral motion to unseal any documents in the family court case. That conceptually makes sense. I want to make sure there's no documents that might not be relevant to this case, that there might be a problem. I can't envision any right now. Any objection from the defense?
You know, my only concern was, Your Honor, and I expressed this to Ms. Andrews, is there's Social Security numbers of Mr. McQueary and Ms. Johnson in those documents. Maybe that should be redacted, or maybe that, I mean, it's not necessary for the case. So I would just bring that up as a concern.
And that's a fair concern. Here's what I'd like to do. It's ordered unsealing the documents initially for the court's use only. I'll share it with counsel only initially. What I want counsel to do is look and see is there any personal information, such as Social Security numbers, that ought to be redacted. And then we can redact as appropriate, and then the documents can be utilized. So it's ordered unsealing the family court file right now only for the court's use and counsel's use. We'll get a copy. Who's got the copies, Ms. Andrews? It's still with the clerk's office?
The copy is
the family court file you want unsealed?
They're not in evidence, but they're marked.
Okay. So we physically have them. Okay. So we physically have them. So what I want counsel to do is before they're utilized in open court, make sure you check them and you can redact them if necessary. And if there's any dispute over what needs to be redacted, talk to me and I can resolve it. Okay? Any other issues before we start dealing with Dr. O'Connell's issue?
I have a procedural question, Your Honor.
Yes.
Since this is just an evidentiary hearing for the benefit of the court, did Your Honor want me to go ahead and ask Dr. O'Connell about her education and her training and all of those things that we would normally have in front of the jury? Did you want me to go ahead and inquire into that?
Let me ask the state for, and maybe you won't know till you interview her, is the state going to, or planning on raising any challenge to her testimony on 702 grounds? If not, I'd rather focus on what is her testimony going to be, and is that admissible or not admissible for the reasons that have been briefed?
I think it would be beneficial to everybody to focus testimony as you stated.
Okay, so the answer is you don't need to go into educational background. Just I want to focus on what would her testimony be at trial from your perspective, and then any cross-examination, and then we'll determine whether that testimony is admissible or not. All right, so let me know when you're finished interviewing Dr. O'Connell. When you're finished, we'll come in, take some testimony, and then we'll decide what we're going to do.
And Your Honor, I'm sorry, an additional procedural question. Was Your Honor going to permit in-session TV to tape this proceeding?
Does anyone have any objection to it?
We would object to it.
Okay, on what basis?
There will be confidential information about Ms. Smith that the doctor will be testifying to. I realize it's a public hearing, and if the jury hears it, it will be public. I understand that. My concern, Judge, is if it's not admitted, then that information is out there.
Isn't the information essentially out there in the documents you've already filed? They're not under seal. Is there additional information that's not out there in the documents that you filed?
We have not filed Dr. O'Connell's report.
Okay.
We've disclosed it, but we haven't. It's not part of the court record.
All right. Does the state have a position? It's not really your issue as much as the defense's issue.
I have no position here.
Okay. I think for the nature of this hearing, I'm concerned about confidential information that may or may not come out at trial. And if my decision is that it doesn't come out at trial, then it may not be appropriate for airing. And so I am going to, for purposes that media can be present, it's just whether it's going to be filmed. In fact, I mean, let's think about this. Are you asking that it not be filmed, or that the courtroom or media not have access? Because those are two very different things, and I'm not inclined to do the latter. This is a public trial. It's just whether it's filmed or not.
I understand the distinction, Your Honor, and I should have made the distinction. We're asking that it not be recorded.
Okay, so you're asking for it not to be recorded.
For
okay.
television.
All right. I'm inclined to grant the request to not record Dr. O'Connell's testimony. I'm a little bit... the testimony itself and the confidential information, yes. The argument, though, I'm inclined to allow to be filmed, and I think we can stay away from confidential information. Is that a reasonable expectation?
I think that's acceptable, Your Honor.
Okay, so specifically, as to Dr. O'Connell's testimony, it's ordered granting the motion that it not be recorded, but there's no restriction on access, of course. With respect to the rest of the proceedings, including the oral argument, that can be recorded. So that's the ruling. All right?
Thank you.
So we'll see you in a few minutes. Technically, it's the state's motion to preclude mental health testimony, but let's get to, I think, from my perspective, the framework for analysis that I would like to follow. And maybe we can start out with what we can agree on and then see where the disagreement lies. First, and let me start with you, Ms. Phillips. As I understand it, you do not intend to present Dr. O'Connell's testimony to argue a diminished capacity defense, correct? You also are not intending on presenting Dr. O'Connell's testimony to argue that Ms. Smith did not have the ability or the capacity to form the intent to commit these offenses, correct?
Correct.
Your desired use of the testimony is so that you can, well, you seek to, from your perspective, admit her testimony under Rule 404A. Is that correct?
Correct.
As a character trait, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about what that means. I am struggling to find an Arizona case that would specifically allow such testimony in under 404A, that explicitly finds 404A as the basis, perhaps other than Christensen, and really no other case other than Christensen. There is another case, and that's State versus Ortiz. But really, the only cases that have allowed expert testimony, or the kind of observation testimony we're talking about, has been in the first-degree murder context, and that testimony has been offered to show or to try and prove whether or not a defendant, not that, and the expert didn't testify that they did or did not reflect, but whether they had the capacity to reflect. Would you agree with that?
With the statement that the case law appears to only be in the context of first-degree murder cases, I would agree with that.
Okay. So we would be going into new territory in terms of at least reported Arizona decisions. I understand we've got Clark out there, and we'll talk about Clark in a moment. There is pretty broad language in the Mott case that would preclude using the expert opinion, whether it's diminished capacity or for intent. You filed a supplemental response that relies on the Supreme Court's decision in the Clark case, and that decision essentially found or set forth three categories of evidence, and you're relying on what they assessed as Category 1 observation evidence. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Let me make sure, before we get to kind of the box that you'd like to fit in, Dr. O'Connell, over your testimony, just answered the question from Ms. Andrews, what she thought might be helpful to the jury from her perspective. From your perspective, is there anything that she left out or that she shouldn't have put in there that you would want to put in front of the jury?
No.
Okay, so is it fair to say that her testimony of what she thought might be helpful to the jury is consistent with what you think might be helpful, and in fact what you would be intending on asking her about in a direct examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and that's consistent with what's been in your paper, so there's nothing surprising to me that I find there. Here's the issue I've got. Is I'm struggling to find whether we call it 404A or whatever we call it, observation evidence, the relevance of the testimony that she would give as it relates to this case. And you can't just say 404A means that a character trait of the defendant automatically comes in, because 404A says evidence of a pertinent trait of character. So there's an assumption that there's got to be a relevance analysis. How is anything that she says going to be relevant to this jury in deciding whether Ms. Smith is guilty or not guilty?
And, Your Honor, we've discussed this a few times, so I know that the court is struggling to find the relevance. And that's why I filed the memo, Judge. I was trying to set forth the relevance. I think Clark tells us that observational testimony is always relevant, whether it's a lay person or an expert. In this case, we have an expert that's going to talk about it. It is anticipated that the state's going to introduce the observational from a lay person's testimony. They have witnesses that will talk about Ms. Smith's behavior in other situations that were similar. So I think it's tied together as a package, Your Honor. I think that's what makes it relevant. I think character trait evidence, again, under Clark, it helps her present a complete defense. She's entitled to present a complete defense. And it's pertinent for, well, the relevance, I guess, is decided by the jury. The jury decides whether or not it's relevant The case law says they can take it, they can use it, they can ignore the expert's testimony or the state's lay witnesses. It's no different than if I were to, the way I see it, Judge, and the way I read it, and I've done lots of research the last few weeks over this, it's no different than if I were to bring in a neighbor that says, she's a great person. It's not relevant to whatever action in conformity therewith on the occasion of the crimes charged, but it's admissible. And the result is that the state can present rebuttal and the court can give a limiting instruction.
Is it your position that every form of character evidence is thus admissible if we're talking about the defendant? I'm not hearing a limitation from your perspective. Isn't there some limitation? Isn't there some line of relevance where just because it's character evidence of the defendant doesn't mean it automatically comes in?
You know, Judge, I think that's a great question. I'm not seeing any case law to that effect that says you can't.
Okay, well,
that it's not relevant, that you can't get it in.
Well, let's talk about that. I'm kind of loath to go there because it's a difficult conversation in terms of the United States Supreme Court and how the United States Supreme Court is reading an Arizona case. In Clark, the Supreme Court created those three categories, and then it cited to Mott as the basis, Mott being the Arizona case State versus Mott. And the United States Supreme Court commented that the Arizona Supreme Court had basically created or at least blessed these three levels or categories of evidence. The problem is if you go back and read the page that Clark cites, and Clark cites no other authority for these three categories other than Mott, and then it cites a page of Mott and says, here are the three categories. Mott doesn't say that. It just doesn't, with all due respect to the United States Supreme Court. Now, they may be thinking about down the road the categories they're going to create that we will all live with. But Mott doesn't say what the United States Supreme Court says it says. It's much narrower. It's diminished capacity, and it's very clear that the evidence can't go to intent. And that was the attempt in Mott. Mott did not have this broad discussion about observational evidence. I will tell you the impression that I got in reading Clark, and there actually is an Arizona case that talks about Clark a little bit. It's the State versus Wright case, trying to make heads or tails of this three categories and observation evidence. I think that the observation evidence is limited to, if it's expert, it's when it's supporting a diagnosis of mental disease. Because that's what was happening in Clark. There was an argument about whether the defendant was insane or not. So that was the focus of the case. And I think, in my view, there's some unfortunate dicta that might suggest that observationally anybody can come in and testify what they observe for any defendant, but that can't be the law. There's got to be a line of relevance, whether it's character evidence, whether we want to call it observation, there's got to be some level of relevance. We can't get into, for example, let's get into the extreme. We can't get into, in a case like this that might have nothing to do with the issues, for example, if she was the victim of domestic violence, unless there's some tie to what happened. You've got to be careful because the jury is instructed not to decide based on emotion or sympathy, and that's creating that possibility, and it's especially creating the possibility for presenting evidence of personality traits that don't have any tie into motive, intent. Now, this is a catch-22 because basically we're saying you're not allowed to get into intent or get into mens rea otherwise. In my view, the law right now in Arizona under Mott, and it might still need to be expanded on, is that expert observation evidence as to character may have a very narrow basis, and right now it's only on whether a defendant is reflective in a first-degree murder, and nobody's opened it up. And I don't think that Clark does the trick with its analysis of Mott, if I look at Mott. Here's the other thing I'll tell you, and I've been struggling just intellectually with, well, wait a minute, a defendant needs to be able to present character evidence, and if I'm going to err on any side, I'm going to let the defense present information. What you're proposing to give me feels a lot more like something I hear or get in a sentencing memorandum to justify or explain why someone committed an offense versus a defense to a charge. It just doesn't seem to me to be in the proper place. All of these things that might justify or explain what Ms. Smith was going through makes perfect sense to me if we are at some point in the sentencing context. But it does not, in my view, give the jury virtually any relevant information about whether she committed the offenses here. And that's the struggle I've got. I just can't get beyond that.
And Your Honor, I know we have talked about that, and I understand that the court is struggling with that. And Judge, maybe this is that case that that might go up, and the court might say this is a different situation from Mott. And I don't disagree with you that Clark's analysis of Mott is a little
loose.
Loose is a good way to put it. Thank you. I don't disagree with that at all, Judge. But I would say that in light of Clark being a Supreme Court case, that it supersedes Arizona law, and maybe this is just one of those cases. There is not much Arizona law in this situation. And with all due respect, Your Honor, I think your analysis of being concerned about relevancy and specific intent is off. I think that Clark says that this observational testimony is admissible. The jury can be permitted to decide what weight to give it, if any, and the state can offer their rebuttal to it. I think that's the solution, Judge. I think Dr. O'Connell has given us enough fuel to use that makes Tammy's behavior relevant to these charges. Her problems, the problem-solving abilities, the abilities to not think through well with problem-solving, those sorts of things.
But to me, the only relevance, and again to the catch-22 that this testimony could have, would be if you were attempting to leapfrog. I don't think leapfrog's the right thing. Utilize the testimony to say, because of these personality characteristics that she's got, she didn't understand, she couldn't form the intent. But of course, Arizona law says you can't do that. And let me read you something, and it goes back to what Clark says and why I'm struggling. It says, Mott was careful to distinguish this kind of opinion evidence, what we've talked about, from observation evidence generally, and even from observation evidence that an expert witness might offer, such as descriptions of a defendant's tendency to think in a certain way or his behavioral characteristics. The Arizona court made it clear that this sort of testimony was perfectly admissible to rebut the prosecution's evidence of mens rea. Now, if that were true, if that's what Mott says, you win. But that's not what Mott says. Clark says that the testimony can rebut the evidence of mens rea, but Mott says just the opposite. And that's what I'm struggling with. And again, I respect what the Supreme Court's saying, but that's not what Mott says.
Let me suggest this in this way, then, Judge. The state will be presenting 404B testimony.
That was going to be the next issue I want to talk about. I'm going to talk to Ms. Andrews about.
Ms. Smith has a right to defend against the 404B testimony that they intend to introduce. And how else can she defend other than by saying, that's just who I am, that's my character?
And that, you raised the one issue I wanted to talk to Ms. Andrews about, because that's a valid argument, and I note that your papers reference, wait a minute, this is more than just a pure 404A offer, it's in response to a 404B. So I went back and looked, and the state did indeed file a notice as required for 404B. Here's the problem with that. Number one, the notice sets forth a bunch of occurrences that relate to Ms. Smith exhibiting the desire to adopt, taking steps to adopt, and in fact, some of those were referenced in opening statements. Your response to that 404B notice was, this isn't 404 at all. This is, in fact, just elements that you would expect to have to prove, and they've got to prove it at trial. Don't try and backdoor what you have to prove with a 404 notice. This isn't 404. And you know what? I agree with you. I'm not sure what happened in response to, I didn't look at the ruling.
And Judge McMurdy ruled that it was subject to whether or not the state could lay the foundation.
And that's what you asked for, and I think that that's right. If the state lays the foundation for evidence that would show that she actually had the state of mind to want to adopt and was in a certain place. So I guess the question is, and let me go to Ms. Andrews, if the state's making a big deal about, I think the word was used a lot, obsessed and things like that, can't they put it in a proper context and explain it to the jury, or do they have to leave it out there like she's an obsessed person and not explain where she's coming from?
Well, Your Honor, first of all, our 404B motion isn't that she was obsessed. Our 404 evidence is actual acts that she committed that show that that was her intent. It's going to be up to the jury to determine the intent based on the acts we show. It's not us saying, hey, she had, I mean, that's her argument, that she had the intent because she did this. But we have witnesses who are going to come in and say, this is what Tammi Smith did on such and such occasion. This is what Tammi Smith said on such and such occasion.
Right.
They want to rebut that with her personality.
But there's more to what you're doing. You are doing what you said, and you can bring in witnesses that say that she was doing this on such and such on this occasion. But you're doing more than that. You've already argued that she's obsessed, that there's something about her, that she couldn't stop doing this. She was obsessed. And you're going to undoubtedly build on that theme in closing. And yet now they have to be silent about where she was coming from when she was talking to someone in line at a fast food restaurant or whatever that the evidence is going to be. They have to be silent even though you're going after the very things that she wants to set forth. However, I'm not sure you're saying anything different. You're explaining why she was doing what the state is attempting to prove she was doing. And again, I'm struggling with whether you can get into the why. But I will tell you there's some part of me that says there's a little fairness thing that says, wait a minute. If you're going to argue that these things she did that show intent, show someone who's obsessive and just completely, totally engrossed in getting a child, can't they at least take the edge off to explain to a jury why she was thinking that way? Because you get a view of somebody who's just obsessed and there's no context for the jury.
Well, I think that's kind of what the concern was in the Clark case about presenting expert testimony on this type of behavior. I mean, essentially, we have lay witnesses who are going to come in and say, Tammi Smith did this on such and such occasion, and Tammi Smith did that on such and such occasion. When you start bringing in expert witnesses to explain away that behavior, personality evidence. I mean, that's what Dr. O'Connell referred this to. She's going to come in and talk about the defendant's personality. You start getting into that whole diminished capacity issue. I mean, it goes back to, regardless of the fact that defense counsel says, well, we're not using it for diminished capacity, we're not using it for intent. But if the expert gets up there and testifies this is her personality, how is the jury to know they can't use it for diminished capacity? I mean, I don't even know how you would write an instruction that says that you can't do this. You know, the defense counsel said, you know, they can bring in a neighbor to say she's a great person. That's actually not true. They can't just in any case bring in a neighbor to testify that somebody's a great person because 404 says you can. It doesn't. That's not what 404 allows. It allows you to bring in testimony about a pertinent character trait. We're going to bring in evidence that the defendant acted in certain ways and did certain actions about adoption and desire to adopt a child. Maybe they can bring in testimony that affects, well, no, she wasn't obsessed with the child. because she did this or that other thing, but I don't see how her personality is a defense to the acts that show she didn't make a mistake in this case, that she intended to take this child from Logan regardless of Logan's position, that she had a plan, that she had a scheme. I mean, that's what the evidence is coming in for, and I don't see how her personality negates that. I don't see how her personality is evidence to dispute that. And that's kind of where we're concerned. And you know, Clark specifically talks about bringing in disputing experts that would essentially confuse the issue for the jury. And that's what's happening here. They don't just want to bring in lay people who knew Tammy at the time that she was trying to adopt, other people who could talk about her reasons for wanting to adopt or why she was so intent on adopting. And in fact, Dr. O'Connell doesn't address that at all. She doesn't talk about Tammy's desires to adopt. She doesn't talk about Tammy's need to have a child. She talks specifically about her personality and being naive and not understanding consequences. She doesn't refer to the information we put in our 404 motion at all. And in fact, Dr. O'Connell doesn't even know anything about that because she wasn't presented with that information. She wasn't provided with any police report. She wasn't provided with our 404 motion. She wasn't provided with any statements or conversations Tammi Smith made to anybody. And so her statement really is lacking in explanation for what we're trying to admit, both in the trial as far as our evidence and in our 404 motion, regardless of whether you think it's 404 motion or part of the crime.
Okay. All right, Ms. Phillips, I'm going to give you the last word. We've kicked this around many times now, and I think you're doing what you can, but I'm still struggling with it. I understand that gut response to what they're saying. The concern I've got simply is it's not pertinent information such that the jury can use it on a relevant issue. They can't use it as to intent or mens rea. And if they can't, then they can't use it for anything relevant other than potentially for sympathy or prejudice, and we get into a 403 type issue from my perspective. And I will tell you in the State versus Wright case, the one Arizona case that wrestles with Clark, State versus Wright says that Clark says observation evidence is permitted appears to be that which would support a professional diagnosis of disease is what I think the observational evidence that Clark is talking about at the end of the day, at least as interpreted by Arizona courts. So that academic discussion aside, at the end of the day, I don't think it's got sufficient relevance under 404A such that it's admissible, and that's where I'm stuck.
And Your Honor, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what more I can say that I haven't already said. We think it's relevant. We think it's relevant to defend against the 404B allegations. I mean, I can't, of course, Dr. O'Connell isn't going to address the adoption issue because then they would argue that that was going to specific intent.
And hence the catch-22 for you. I agree. And
I think, Your Honor, I think we can craft a jury instruction that would be sufficient, and that could possibly and probably satisfy all sides.
I think you have left no arguments on the table. You're arguing that there are no cases that you've left. You're doing what you can. But at the end of the day, I think this type of testimony in this case does not present sufficient relevance under 404A. It's not pertinent enough to go to the jury. I don't think that any of Dr. O'Connell's opinions, and by the way, I'm accepting that her opinions are admissible for 702 purposes. I'm accepting that there's a scientific basis for them, and they would be otherwise permitted if we weren't having the discussion regarding relevance. I don't believe that because you are not permitted to argue in intent, that these opinions provide any relevant information to the jury. And I think that presenting Dr. O'Connell's testimony runs the risk of confusing the jury and perhaps leading to a decision based on sympathy or prejudice because they're getting evidence about personality traits that cannot and are not being used to defend the claims that have been brought. The door, of course, could always be opened under the circumstances, but I don't think that the state's 404B notice opens the door to this information. I understand your desire to rebut the argument, but if they are presenting witnesses that will talk about specific circumstances that support the intent or that the defendant committed the offenses, they're permitted to do that. And under the circumstances, I don't think Dr. O'Connell's testimony is admissible. So I'm granting the state's motion to preclude Dr. O'Connell for the reasons I've set forth. Anything else we need
Not
to
from the state, Your Honor.
Anything from defendant's perspective?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, let's talk scheduling. We can do it off the record. Okay, so tomorrow, who are we calling tomorrow?
Your Honor, we had Craig Cherry first, and he did contact my office yesterday and strongly assert that he does not want to be filmed.
Okay. Well, his voice and everything can be filmed except his face, from my perspective. So when Mr. Cherry comes in, the media is directed not to film his face while he's testifying. And so I will tell him that that's going to happen. Actually, I'm not going to do it in front of the jury because I don't want to accentuate to the jury that your face isn't going to be filmed, because I don't want to keep pointing out the cameras to the jury. But I can tell him, or you can tell him, if he wants to hear it from me, that's fine. But just tell him that that's the court's order and that's what's going to happen if you're able to talk to him.
It's probably best to hear it from you, Your Honor. I think it'll ease things a bit.
Before we start, then, we'll bring Mr. Cherry up and I'll talk to him outside the presence of the jury tomorrow to assure him that his face won't be shown. Okay, and so we got Mr. Cherry, then what else?
Then our intention is to call Detective Duplissis, who is scheduled for today, as long as it works within his schedule. And then we had Detective Aguilera, Detective, I believe it's Laos, if I can remember, LAUX, and Detective Duarte, and Officer Pena. We have Officer Pena scheduled for 3:30. We may have to call him out of order because he has to get on and off the stand. So we may have to change up that schedule depending on how quickly we go tomorrow.
Okay. Okay. Anything from anybody's perspective we need to talk about? Any housekeeping issues?
Not from the state, Your Honor.
Anything from defendant?
No, Your Honor.
All right. So we'll see everybody tomorrow at 10:30. And Ms. Ramuno, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Cherry.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm good.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Mr. Cherry, tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you from the Phoenix area currently?
Yes, born and raised.
All right. And you recently moved back to the Phoenix area.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Where did you live prior to that?
I was living at Apache Lake.
All right. And approximately how long did you live in the Apache Lake area?
14 months.
All right. And what did you do while you were there?
I was a cook, and that was about it.
Okay. And you worked at a resort up there, is my
Yes.
understanding? Okay.
Yes.
How long did you work there?
14 months.
14 months. Now, were you working there during the time period of January 2010?
Yes.
Okay. Or at least were you living in the Apache Lake area during
Right,
that
yes.
time? Okay. During that time, did some information come to your attention about your possible involvement in this case?
Yes, it did.
All right. And specifically, when were you first made aware of your name being involved in this case?
As far as the day, I don't know, but when 2 detectives showed up and questioned me about it.
Okay. And were they from Tempe Police Department, do you recall?
I believe so.
Okay. And they came up to the Apache Lake area to speak with you?
Yes.
All right. Now, when they came to speak with you, did you give them some information about yourself?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I've got the worst memory.
Okay, that's fair. What did you know about your involvement at that time?
Pretty much from what they told me, that my name was used in a court document concerning a baby and Elizabeth Johnson.
Okay, now previous to the detectives coming up there, let's back up a little bit. Do you know Tammi Smith?
I do.
Okay, and how do you know Tammi Smith?
She's my cousin.
All right, and it's my understanding that your mother's brother is her father.
Yes.
All right. And obviously you knew she was your cousin since you were a child, correct?
Yes.
All right. So this is not information that was recently made aware to you?
No.
All right. When the officers came to speak to you, Were they aware of that information, or did you advise them that you were Tammy's cousin?
I don't think they did know. Yeah, I don't think anybody really knew because I got phone calls from media and stuff.
Okay. When the officers came, did Tammy call you about this?
I honestly couldn't tell you because there was 2 visits from the police, and I really don't know. Had I known about it prior to them coming the first time, but when they came the second time, I knew. I'm not sure if that's what prompted me to call Tammy or what.
Okay.
I really don't remember.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. The police officers came and talked to you on 2 occasions. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
All right. And if the police records indicate that one was on January 11th and the other time was on January 13th, 2010, would you have any reason to disagree with that?
I don't think it was within 2 days, but you said January 11th, January 13th? Yeah, I don't think it was that close, but it could have been.
Okay. And I just want to clarify, at some point, did you speak with Tammy about this?
Yes.
All right. And you're stating that you don't recall whether it was before the police officers came or after?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Are you aware that the police officers recorded the conversations they had with you?
Again, I don't remember them recording it. Maybe the second time.
Okay.
Because the first time it was kind of like it was just the one visit. They spoke to me because I was actually working at the time when they showed up. And we went outside on the patio, and I don't remember there being a recording device, but...
Okay. Well, if I indicate to you that there was a recording and that there's a transcript of that recording, I believe we talked about it before you came in the courtroom. Do you recall that? All right. Do you recall talking to the officers about the fact that Tammy had called you prior to their arrival?
No, was it the first arrival or the second arrival?
The first arrival.
First arrival. I don't remember saying that, no.
Okay. Would you agree, though, that Tammy did call you, though, about this?
I don't know if it was them showing up at my place of business that prompted me to call her, or I honestly don't know.
So you're stating today now that you called her?
I would imagine so, yeah, because it was kind of all new to me.
Do you recall telling the officers that she called you first?
No.
Okay. At some point, though, you had a conversation with her. I'm not asking you when it happened at this point. At some point, you had a conversation with her. Is that correct?
Yes.
One minute. In normal conversation, it's easy for us to talk at the same time if you know what someone's going to ask you. But for purposes here, the court reporter can't take down what you're saying if you're talking at the same time as Ms. Ramuno. So make sure she finishes her question before you give an answer. Okay. And she'll make sure your answer is finished before she asks a question so you're not talking over each other. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. So at some point, you did have a conversation with Tammy?
Yes.
About this?
Yes.
Okay, and what did she tell you?
I believe she was under the assumption that Elizabeth, you got my name from them talking about me because of the fact that the potential baby dad and I kind of have the same track record. And so she was trying to maybe, I don't know if console is the right word, but just let her know that maybe things aren't as bad as she was leading Tammy to believe they were with him and whatnot. And in doing so, she mentioned my name. And so she was under the impression that Elizabeth got my name and used it for this purpose.
Okay. Now, you mentioned something that you might have a similar track record as the baby's father. What do you mean by that?
I guess he's been in and out of jail and, whatnot.
And have you had a similar experience?
I've got a lead foot. Back in the day, I was kind of, speeding tickets no biggie, but when you don't pay it, and, so I was kind of in and out of jail there for a while.
Okay. So. Specifically, you have been convicted of a felony previously. Sure. Actually, 2 felonies?
I think it's just 1.
Okay. Our records indicate that there was one that occurred on July 28th, 1999 for attempted taking the identity of another.
Yes.
And another on September 23rd, 1999?
Same charge?
This taking the identity of another.
Oh, so it's the same. I don't know why they would charge me twice.
Okay.
I used my brother's. Did you want me to go in detail about that, or?
If you'd like to explain.
I used my brother's ID. I was 19. I wanted to get into the club, so I got his ID. my part was to get his GED for him. So if you guys can do something about that, that'd be nice. Anyway, so I got his GED for him, and then shortly after getting his ID with my picture on it, I got a speeding ticket and never paid it. And his answer to that was to turn me in for it. He did. And they called it taking the identity of another.
Did you use his ID when you got the ticket?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So Tammy was aware of this?
I don't know that detailed of it,
Okay.
but yeah.
But she was aware that you had trouble with the law?
Oh, definitely.
Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So when she's having this conversation with you about how your name got involved in the court documents, she's indicating to you that she had been explaining to Elizabeth Johnson a little bit about you?
Yes.
Okay. And kind of making a comparison between you and the father of the baby?
Yes.
All right. Now, did you told the officers that, correct?
I couldn't tell you. I really don't know.
You don't recall whether or not you talked to the officers about that?
I don't.
Okay. Mr. Cherry, were you aware prior to your name being used on this court document that it was going to be used?
Not until the detective showed up.
Okay, so did you give anyone permission to use your name on that court document?
No.
Do you know Elizabeth Johnson?
I do not.
You've never met her?
No.
Okay, so it's safe to assume that you are not the father of her child?
Yes.
May I have one moment, Your Honor?
You may.
I have no further questions, thank you.
Thank you. Cross-examination, Ms. Phillips?
We have your questions, Mr. Cherry.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere yet. Before we let you step down, does the jury have any questions for Mr. Cherry? Going once, going twice. May this witness be excused, Ms. Romano?
Yes, please, Your Honor.
Ms. Phillips?
Please, Your Honor.
Now you may step down. Thank you, Mr. Cherry. And Ms. Romano, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, would you please state your full name for the record?
Hello, I'm Gary Duplissis. I'm a police detective. I work for the city of Tempe.
And how long have you worked for the city of Tempe?
I've been a peace officer for 15 years.
And how long have you been a detective?
I've been a detective for just over 12.
All right. Now, what assignments have you had as a detective?
I spent about slightly over 7 years working in the juvenile unit, working all manner of crimes involving juveniles. And for the last about 5 years, I've worked in the persons crimes unit and also auto theft.
And is that the current position you are in?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm going to draw your attention to December of 2009.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. At that time, did you become involved in an investigation involving a missing child by the name of baby Gabriel?
I did.
All right. And how was it that you became involved in that investigation?
On the 28th of December, I was asked to attend a meeting where information about a report that had been filed the day before regarding the missing baby was presented to me and a group of other investigators.
Okay. And at that time, did you have any specific assignment, or was that just a briefing of what was happening in the case?
We had a briefing that day, and then I was given some tasks.
Okay. And what tasks were you given on that day?
I was advised that there was a family court hearing that afternoon involving Logan McQueary regarding custody issues involving Elizabeth Johnson and the baby. And I attended the family court hearing that afternoon.
Okay. And when you attended the family court hearing that afternoon, what did you do at that court hearing?
I was present during the court hearing, and I presented some testimony as well.
Okay. And what testimony did you present to the court?
My testimony was regarding the report that had been filed that the claims made by Mr. McQueary were accurately represented that day, and that my police department had genuine concern for the care, the location, and the welfare of Gabriel.
Okay. And do you know what happened at the conclusion of that hearing?
At the conclusion of the hearing, temporary custody of Gabriel was given to Logan McQueary.
And were you provided with a a warrant at that time?
I was provided a warrant to take custody of the child. Yes, ma'am.
And did you impound that warrant?
I did.
Is there anything that you did after that hearing?
On that date?
Yes.
I met with the county attorney. We discussed the case with the other parties involved with the case, the detectives and the supervisors, and ultimately direct complaint was filed that day.
Okay, and was that against Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes, it was.
All right. And did you contact any other authorities that day?
That day, I met with the Superior Court judge. A warrant was issued for Elizabeth Johnson's arrest. I arranged to have the national warrant entered into the NCIC computer. I also worked with the National Center for Missing Exploited Children. And I believe the next day I worked to flag the birth certificate of baby Gabriel in case duplicate copies were ordered.
Okay. Now I just want to back up a little bit. You said you contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children?
Yes, ma'am.
And what information did you provide to them?
I provided them the information about this case, the baby's specific information photographs, the mother's specific information photographs, and began a case file.
Okay. And with regard to flagging the baby's birth certificate, what was the purpose of doing that?
Well, by flagging the birth certificate with the Office of Vital Records, if someone were to try to order a duplicate copy, I would be notified of who that was and where they were at.
Okay. After taking that action, what was your next assignment in this case?
I had many assignments over the course of this investigation. I had several weeks worth of work. I think I wrote 20 supplemental reports.
Okay. Were you assigned to follow up on tips?
I followed up on several tips, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you follow up on Elizabeth Johnson's location in Florida?
To some degree, yes.
Okay. I'm going to draw your attention to January 10th, 2010. At that time, were you assigned to assist in preparing a presentation for the San Antonio Police Department?
I was.
Okay. And was that to assist Detective Thompson?
This is true.
Okay. And what was the purpose of preparing that presentation?
Detective Thompson is in the Homicide Bureau. He was preparing to make a presentation to the San Antonio Police Department regarding the possible homicide of Gabriel.
Okay. And what did you do to assist in the preparation of that?
Some of those tasks, if I can refer to some notes, I worked on criminal histories of the parties involved. I located past reports and documentation involving the police department and the parties.
Your Honor, you just have the witnesses referring to some notes. Could we please clarify for the record, what it is?
Yes. Let's talk about what you have in front of you and what we need to do. If you feel a need to reference your notes, let us know like you did. We want to make sure that you need those to refresh your memory. So why don't you tell us what you're looking at?
This is a binder that contains my reports and supportive documents.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
And specifically, you're referring to notes that you made yourself?
Correct.
Regarding the contents of your report?
Yeah, there's a large volume of information here.
All right. Thank you. Just let us know if you have to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just let us know.
That's fine.
Okay. So you indicated that you reviewed prior police reports?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what else did you review?
I looked at field contact cards. I helped to transcribe a news interview report that had been made. And I, later in the evening, was asked to listen to some recordings that had been made by Logan McQueary.
And were those from his digital recorder that he had turned over to the police department?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now I'm going to go over a little bit of what you reviewed. And as far as reviewing previous police reports, did you review a Tempe police incident report number 09149483 dated September 9th of 09 regarding criminal damage?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And was that regarding Elizabeth Johnson destroying some property?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you also review Tempe Police Department Incident Report Number 09202-998 dated December 9th, 2009?
Can you give me a little more details about that?
Regarding a disturbance at a workplace?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And was that at the 99-cent store?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the initial report was a disturbance at a workplace, but then it turned into a false report to law enforcement?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And that was regarding Elizabeth Johnson's false report of a kidnapping?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. On December 9th, 2009?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, you mentioned field interrogation cards.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain a little bit of what those are?
A field interrogation card would be, generally speaking, handwritten notes that an officer makes in the field that would document contact with someone, not necessarily a criminal matter.
Okay. And did you review a card dated December 8th of 2009 where Elizabeth Johnson reported that Logan and Gabriel were missing?
I did.
Okay, and that they were later found at his grandmother's home?
Correct.
Okay. And did you also review a field interrogation card dated December 21st, 2009 requesting assistance in court-ordered parenting time?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that request made by Logan McQueary?
It was.
Okay. Now, after reviewing all those matters, then, were those summarized in a presentation for the San Antonio Police Department?
They were summarized in notes that I typed and provided for Detective Thompson to use or not use as he made his presentation.
Okay. And specifically, the recordings from the digital recorder, did you review approximately 10 files on that recorder?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you made a summary of what was contained on that recorder?
Yes, ma'am.
Now I'm going to draw your attention to the date of January 11th, 2010.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you assigned to follow up in contacting an individual by the name of Craig Cherry?
I was.
Okay, and what did you do to follow up with that?
I was partnered with Detective Nathan Ryberg that day. We were asked to locate Mr. Cherry and speak to him about this incident. There had been two issues that had come up. Local news media had raised his name in relation to custody issue involving Gabriel. And also there was a wiretap that had been in place and a phone call had been intercepted between Mr. Cherry and Tammi Smith.
And the initial information regarding Mr. Cherry's name being on this document, was the source of that from the media?
Initially, I believe so.
Okay. And so the police department was not aware of that from any other source at that point?
I believe not at that time.
Okay. And you indicated that in addition to the media report of that, there was also a phone conversation which alerted the police department to Mr. Cherry?
Correct.
Okay. And so on that date of January 11th, 2010, you drove up to Apache Lake?
I did.
Okay. And did you in fact make contact with Mr. Cherry that day?
We did.
All right. And when you made contact with him, were you aware of who he was in relation to any of the parties in the case?
I was aware that he was the cousin of Tammi Smith.
All right. And was that based on the wiretap conversation?
I believe it was also done through records checks.
Okay. And did Mr. Cherry confirm that information with you, that in fact he was the cousin of Tammi Smith?
He did.
Okay. Did he indicate to you at that time whether or not he had spoken with Tammi Smith prior to you meeting him on the very first day?
He said that he had.
Okay. In fact, did he state that he had spoken to her about an hour before you got there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he relayed the contents of that conversation to you?
Generally, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Once you finished speaking with him that day, did you return back to Tempe?
We did.
Okay. And did you have to do additional follow-up with Mr. Cherry?
Yes, I know that Detective Ryberg made an appointment with him on the next day for an additional interview on the following day, which would have been the 13th.
Okay. So did you in fact meet with him again on January 13th?
On January 13th, Detective Ryberg and I again went to Apache Lake to follow up with the appointment that had been made on the day prior. And on arrival, we had some difficulty locating him.
Okay. And explain that, please.
It appeared to me that he was hiding from us. We were eventually able to find him with some help of coworkers, I believe. And we then learned after meeting again with Mr. Cherry that he had left a voicemail the night before trying to cancel our appointment with him on that day.
Okay, so prior to you driving up to Apache Lake, you had not received that voice message?
No, ma'am.
Okay, but you did manage to find him that day and speak with him?
I did, yes, ma'am.
And did you conduct a follow-up interview with him?
I did.
All right, and both of the interviews that were conducted with Mr. Cherry, were they recorded?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, also on January 13th, 2010, did you follow up on a tip that had been called in to the police department regarding a female caller identifying herself as Deanne Ayala?
There was a call made on that day. The caller did not initially identify herself.
Okay. Can you explain how that tip came in?
Yes, it was an anonymous call to the non-emergency line, which is a trunked telephone line.
And what does that mean?
It generally means that if the caller ID was blocked, it would be very, very difficult to discern the calling number.
Okay.
In any case, the caller ID was active, so the number was not known. The dispatcher that spoke to the woman.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
We haven't gotten there yet, but we could be getting there. I don't want you to testify regarding what anyone told you or what anyone else said, unless you're specifically asked about that.
Okay.
So why don't we go ahead and ask another question now?
Sure. You received information that a tip had been called in.
I did.
Okay. And from what I'm understanding from what you were stating, was there any contact information left when the tip was called in?
Objection.
No, ma'am.
Calls for hearsay.
That question does not overrule.
No, ma'am.
Okay. So a tip was called in, some information was given, and no follow-up phone number was given at that time. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. Did you take any action to try to locate contact information for that tip?
I did.
Okay, and what was that?
I contacted an information technology specialist and a dispatch supervisor who I know to try to discern if there was any way to find the caller number of this call that had been placed and was recorded and I was able to listen to.
And were you able to get that information?
No, ma'am.
All right. At some point, were you able to get information identifying who this person was?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you obtain that information?
I related the nature and the comments of this recorded call to Detective Ramirez, and in her follow-up, I was later advised that they were able to identify who that caller was and that they spoke to that caller.
Okay. And was the caller eventually identified as Deanne Ayala?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that you had attended a court hearing on December 28th, 2010.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, December 28th, 2009?
2009, yes, ma'am.
Did you conduct any follow-up regarding the court documents in that matter?
Later I did, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and was that on January 14th, 2010?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and what did you do in regards to that?
Detective Ramirez had been in contact with the family court to request original court documents. I was directed to respond back to Judge McVeigh's court, the family court, and meet with staff regarding obtaining the original court documents.
Okay, and did you do that?
I met with his judicial assistant and I met with Judge McVeigh on that day.
Okay. And did you meet with anyone else?
Later in the day, I met with several other people. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and was one of those persons a woman by the name of Mary Young?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and when you came into contact with her, what happened?
I was advised by Judge McVeigh that the original family court documents were all at the clerk of the court at a different location. I changed locations and met with Mary. I was provided an envelope that had been created the day before by Mr. Ed Norris. Mary and I then went through the family court documents page by page to verify that they were all there.
And when you went through those court documents, did you take any precautions in handling those documents?
I did. I wore latex gloves.
Okay, and why did you do that?
I thought there might have been a possibility that there may be fingerprints on the paperwork.
Okay. And after you looked through those documents and you were provided with a receipt, did you reseal the envelope?
Yes, ma'am, and
Okay. There was you resealed the envelope, and then what did you do with it at that point?
I later impounded it as evidence after I made copies.
All right. May I approach the evidence table, Your Honor?
You may.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Detective, I'm showing you what's marked as exhibit number 63. Does that look familiar to you?
It has the report number and my name and ID number on this.
Okay, and would you turn the envelope over, please? And what is on the back of that?
Those are my initials in green pen.
Okay, and what does that mean?
That means that I was the person that sealed this envelope initially and covered it with tape.
Okay, and would you look inside the envelope, please?
Yes, ma'am. Do you want me to wear gloves?
No, that's okay. Does that look familiar to you?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that?
It's marked family court case number, the original documents, and it's the envelope that I was provided from the court.
Okay, and that's the item that you impounded into evidence, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, the state would move to enter exhibit number 63 at this time.
Any objections? Exhibit 63 is admitted.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
May I have one moment, Your Honor, please?
You may.
Detective, did you receive any follow-up information from the court after you obtained those records on January 14th?
I did.
And what was that?
I received a letter from the court indicating that the entire family court file had been formally turned over to me.
Okay, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's marked as proposed exhibit number 55. Do you recognize that envelope?
Not as it is with this green sticker over the top. If I can look underneath, I may be able to. Yes, I do recognize it. It has my name and my employee number on it.
Okay, and is that something that you impounded into evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and would you please look inside the envelope?
Yes, ma'am. It's a letter addressed to me from the clerk of the court.
Okay, is that the letter that you received from the court?
Yes, it is. I recognize it.
Okay, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, the state would move to enter exhibit number 55 at this time.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 55 is admitted.
Detective, on January 14th, 2010, did you also go out to Tammi Smith's home?
I did.
Okay, and what was the purpose to going to her home at that time?
On that evening, a search warrant was being served at the residence in Scottsdale.
Okay, and what was your role in that search warrant?
I was asked to assist in serving the search warrant. My role was to act as scribe.
Okay, and what does that mean?
Generally speaking, the scribe keeps records of items that are seized, the locations and times that they're seized, and the persons that are present participating in the search warrant service.
Okay, so as a little bit of explanation, other individuals will search for items in the home.
Correct.
And then you take that evidence in and document what is found.
Yes, ma'am.
And by whom?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And were items found in the home that date?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and did you document items that were found?
I did.
And once you documented those items that were found, did you impound the seized items?
I did.
Okay, do you recall what you documented and impounded that date?
Yes, ma'am. If I can, from the beginning of arriving, I took photographs of the location, and then I set up a table and chair in the living room of the home. The detectives who were conducting the search conducted their search and then brought items to me and provided me with the times and descriptions that I wrote down on temporary paperwork, and the temporary paperwork served as a receipt.
Okay. And what items were brought to you?
Can I refer to my copies of the receipts
Sure.
that were performed? Okay. Do you want me to go through them one at a time?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Excuse me 1 second. Can you please establish that Detective Duplissis is using this information to refresh his recollection?
And I think we've indirectly done that, but it doesn't hurt to do that. We need to establish whether he can independently remember, whether he needs his notes to refresh his memory.
Sure. Detective, you indicated that you needed to refer to your report to refresh your memory?
No, I wanted to look at the receipt that was provided to the Smith home. This serves as a listing of the individual items.
All right. And once you've looked at that document, does that refresh your memory as to what you documented?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if you could please, once you look at the document, let us know if your memory is refreshed, and then please testify from your memory at that time rather than reading from the document.
Okay.
You can leave it open. Just okay. All right. Is your memory refreshed?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And what were the items that were documented?
There were a total of 8 items seized. The majority of them contained documents or papers. There was a computer and a hard drive as well.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Detective, I'm showing you what's marked as proposed exhibit 53. Your Honor, could please... Oh, I'm sorry.
Show it to Ms. Phillips, please.
May I approach the witness again? I'm showing you what's marked as exhibit 53. Do you recognize that?
Judge, I didn't hear what number was that? 53.
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
This would be a computer hard drive. It has my name, ID number, and initials sealed as well.
And is that the hard drive that was taken at the home that evening?
Yes, ma'am.
May I approach again, Your Honor? Showing you what's marked as exhibit 57. Do you recognize that?
I do as well, ma'am.
And are those documents that were taken from the home that evening?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you impounded those into evidence?
I did. It has my name, employee number, and my sealed initials on it as well.
And the same for exhibit 53, the computer hard drive?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm showing you exhibit 41. Do you recognize that?
Yes, it's another document that was seized. I recognize my name, employee number, and initials. and recognize the document as an item that I impounded.
Okay. I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibit 58. Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
What is that?
Again, it's another group of documents seized from the search warrant that evening that has my name, employee number, and sealed initials on the back.
And I'm showing you Exhibit 59. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And were those taken from the home that evening?
They were.
And what are they, notes?
They are notes. One of them specifically is a note from a media personality. I'm sorry, a media personality is how I recognize it. And it has my name, employee number, and my initials on the back as well.
And I'm showing you Exhibit 60. Do you recognize that?
I do. It has my name, employee number, initials on the back, and I recognize the document from being seized.
Those were taken from the home that evening as well.
They were.
Now, Detective, on the following date of January 15th, 2010, did you follow up with the court again and obtain DVDs of court proceedings?
I did.
Okay. And were those impounded into evidence?
They were, excuse me.
Did you also interview a neighbor of Elizabeth Johnson as part of your investigation?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the purpose of interviewing that neighbor?
I believe the neighbor contacted the police to advise us that Elizabeth Johnson had used...
Sustained.
Can you just describe for us what your purpose was, without telling us what was said? What was your purpose in interviewing that person?
That person contacted the police because his telephone had been used.
Okay, and you followed up by talking to him about that?
I
And
did.
obtaining a statement from him?
I did.
Okay, and did you get his telephone information?
I did.
All right. And do you recall the name of that person?
I believe his name was Gabriel Salas.
I have no further questions at this time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination is closed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Detective
ma'am.
Duplissis, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
You have testified here this morning, Detective, that you testified in front of Judge McVeigh on December the 28th, 2009, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was in the custody case
Yes, ma'am.
between Elizabeth and Logan.
Yes, ma'am.
Who asked you to go testify in that case, sir?
Specifically, I don't recall at this time. I know it was one of the supervisors that was present during the briefing, but I don't know exactly who.
Okay. And you had never been asked to testify in a family court case before, had you?
No, ma'am.
And you were told to go to court by an unknown supervisor, and if there were any questions of police, you were supposed to represent the police department to answer those questions.
Correct.
And the only information you had about this case at that point was from the briefing that you attended.
I had a copy of the original report as well, ma'am. I also had some other general information that hadn't been written down to this point.
Okay, so you had information from the briefing, the original report, and other general information.
Yes, ma'am.
And that original report was written by somebody else,
Yes,
not
ma'am.
you.
Correct.
Now, Tammi and Jack Smith were not present at that hearing, were they?
I don't know if they were present at that hearing.
And do you not know because you had not met them yet?
Correct.
or because there was nobody in the courtroom?
No, I believe there were people present in the courtroom, but I had not met them yet.
You met them when you were at their house, I assume.
No, I did not.
Were they home?
Mr. Smith was home. He was watching TV. He generally didn't seem concerned that we were there. And I very quickly took some photographs of the home and then went to the impounding area.
Now, the day that you obtained the family court file, that was a different day than the day you testified, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you received it, it was sealed?
The family court file?
Yes, sir.
It was in an envelope that I retrieved from the office of the clerk of the court.
And that was sealed?
It was closed.
And do you know who sealed or closed that envelope?
I was told by, I believe it was Mary Young, the clerk of the court, that Ed Norris, another court clerk, had prepared it the day prior at the request of, I believe, the judge.
And you looked at those documents, correct? You testified to that today.
Yes, ma'am.
And were you told by someone to look at those documents?
I was advised that there were some concerns that possibly more than one person had written on paperwork.
Objection, Your Honor. It was non-responsive. I asked him if he had been told by someone to look at the documents.
And the objection is sustained. I take it that's a motion to strike the testimony.
Motion to strike the answer, Your Honor.
The jury will disregard that last statement. Make sure you directly answer the question that's asked. Go ahead and ask the question again.
Okay, I'll try.
Were you told by someone to look at the documents?
I believe so.
But you're not sure?
It would make sense to me that I would examine documents that I would be signing for.
Were those documents signed? Were the court documents signed by the parties?
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
You met with Craig Cherry on 2 occasions, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
The first on January 11th.
Yes, ma'am.
And you've indicated to us today that the way that you learned of his name was through a media tip, correct?
Or a news account.
Okay, a news account.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's how you learned of Craig Cherry's name?
I learned of his name through both ways, through media coverage and the wiretap, and then I was assigned to go talk to him.
Okay, thank you. Now, you've talked a little bit about some of the tips that you followed up on.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain for us the procedure for what happens when the Tempe Police Department receives a tip in general?
In general, if tips are requested, people are asked to call a non-emergency line, or they're asked to call the Criminal Investigations Bureau.
Okay, and who takes that tip? Who takes that tip down?
In this case?
In general?
In general, whoever receives the call.
Okay, so it might be an operator?
Might be a call taker or a communications dispatcher, or it may be, for example, a secretary or an investigative assistant who answers a telephone.
Okay, so there's more than one person at the Tempe Police Department who might receive a tip?
Correct.
Okay, and then what do they do with it once they've received this tip?
In this case, the tips were all forwarded. They also came from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Okay, again, in general, I'm asking about your general procedure. A tip is received.
Yes, ma'am.
The call taker, whoever it is, writes it down. Where does that piece of paper go from there?
It gets forwarded to the appropriate area for follow-up.
And who makes that determination?
There's dispatch supervisors and then investigation supervisors as well. For example, if it were a traffic issue, it will go to the Traffic Bureau.
Okay, thank you. And who decides what, if any, follow-up is done on that tip?
I think generally if it has merit, it would be assigned to review by someone of supervisory rank.
And who decides if it has merit?
A supervisor for assignment? I'm not understanding. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm asking you the procedure. I don't know.
And I'm not a supervisor, so I don't specifically know.
Okay, so some supervisor in whatever department decides if the tip has merit?
Correct, I assume.
Okay, and then they assign it to someone else to follow up? Or they follow up themselves? That was compound, I'm sorry. They assign it then to somebody else to follow up?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And then the person that follows up with the tip, does that person then decide how much follow-up to do?
To some degree.
Okay, is it based on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
They would table the information that they learned with supervision.
Okay, so it's not just their decision whether or not to further follow up with the tip?
It just depends on the individual case.
In whose discretion is it to do further follow-up on a tip?
Supervisors make all of the decisions as far as the finality of tips.
And can you tell me approximately how many tips that the Tempe Police Department received in this case?
I would not have any idea how many.
Approximately, that you're aware of?
I don't know. I know that I probably looked into at least 10 myself.
Okay, is it fair to say that the Tempe Police Department received more than 10 tips?
Oh, I think that's certainly fair.
More than 100 tips?
I don't know.
Now, you've testified that you learned about a telephone from a neighbor named Gabriel Salas, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you learned that Elizabeth had used his phone.
That's the information I was provided.
Okay. And you at some point obtained the list of calls from that phone.
No, ma'am.
You were made aware at some point that there was a list of calls made from that phone.
Yes, someone else call data records, I believe.
And you never reviewed that list?
That wasn't part of my assignment, ma'am, I don't believe.
And you personally did not call anyone on that list?
Not that I recall.
Okay, and you did no follow-up on that list?
I believe I met with the other resident of the home. I can't recall her name right now.
Gotcha.
And I believe that, generally speaking, they were able to tie down a time frame where they thought the phone had been used by Ms. Johnson.
And that was prior to Ms. Johnson leaving for Texas?
Yes, ma'am.
You've indicated that you were at the Smith's home during the execution of the search warrant.
Yes, ma'am.
And you were the scribe for that evening. Okay. And there were other detectives at the home, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you remember how many other detectives were there?
I know that there were 4 other detectives who were searching. I don't know how many other detectives that were there, or officers or supervisors in total were present.
Okay. More than 4?
Yes.
And you stated that Jack Smith was there at the time?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you speak to him?
No, ma'am.
Did he speak to you?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and he didn't cause any problems, did he?
No, ma'am.
As far as you could tell, he was being cooperative with the police?
No, when we arrived, I was briefed that he was contacted in the home and that he was going to be watching TV.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure my question was answered. As far as your opinion is concerned, he was cooperative with police?
Yes, ma'am.
He didn't try to impede anything in the investigation?
Not that I'm aware of that night.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Redirect.
The state has no follow-up. Thank you.
Okay, before we let Detective Duplissis go, does the jury have any questions for him? We do have a question, so we're going to go ahead and get the question. Sit tight. Ladies and gentlemen, this fits under a question that we can't ask for some legal reason, so don't worry about it. I don't want to discourage the jury from asking questions, but this is a question we're not able to ask. Any other questions for the detective before we let him step down from the jury? May this witness be excused. Ms. Romano?
Yes, please, Your Honor.
Ms. Phillips?
No objection.
Detective, you may step down. Thank you. Okay, we are about 5 minutes till noon. Instead of having someone come up and get sworn in and answer about 2 questions and then leaving, we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break. So we will take our afternoon or lunch recess. Please be back at 1:25, ready to go. Until then, remember the admonition, and we'll see you at 1:30. Please be seated, everyone. Okay, any issues that we need to talk about before we take our lunch break? No one's saying yes. Maybe Ms. Phillips?
Yes, Your Honor. I would just like to address on the record the issue of recorded bench conferences.
Okay, then let's talk about that. I think now's a good time to talk about it. Defense has raised, I think, a valid concern about if we're going to have a bench conference, they would like it to be on the record. Logistically, that can be difficult to be on the record. I have in prior trials essentially implemented a practice where we would have a bench conference. The conference itself would not be on the record. I would make a record afterwards outside the presence of the jury and invite counsel to add anything. I think practically that accomplishes what needs to be accomplished. However, I understand the desire to have word for word on the record, and if there's going to be a disputed issue, we will work to make that happen. There are some logistical bugs we need to make sure that we can straighten out. We've got the court reporter over there. We have a microphone designed, I believe, for bench conferences here, but we have noise going, and we have a computer screen between me and the mic. And what I'd like to do before we start at 1:30, have counsel come up and we'll test with the court reporter with the noise on. Are we making a clear enough record for the court reporter to get it down? I will tell you that the FTR is still recording, even if the court reporter's not, but we would like to get it with the court reporter. So we'll test it, see if it works. If it works, that's great, and we feel like the jury won't hear. If it doesn't, then we'll talk about balancing, having to potentially bring the court reporter, bless you, to move a ways before we talk, and whether we can, if we have to go through those hoops. But I do understand the concern about making sure everything's on the record. Anything else we need to talk about? All right, so let's, for counsel, let's get here a little bit early so we can do an experiment with the court reporter before we start at 1:30, and I'll see everyone at 1:30. I think the next witness is going to be Detective Aguilar, I believe.
Your Honor, we haven't decided for sure. It would be one Detective Aguilar, Detective Duarte, or Officer Lau.
Okay, all right, we'll see you at 1:30.